For years, I misunderstood one of the quietest temptations of the spiritual life. Whenever I stumbled upon an insight that genuinely unsettled me, something that altered the way of my thinking, instead of merely decorating it, I felt an almost irresistible urge to pass it on. I believed that if an idea had liberated me, it would surely do the same for someone else. Keeping it to myself felt almost dishonest, so I became a messenger before I had fully become a student. I remember conversations that now feel painfully familiar. A friend trapped in yet another version of the same relationship, unable to see that only the faces changed while the pattern remained. A relative repeating financial decisions whose consequences were as predictable as the seasons. A co-worker who returned every Monday carrying the identical frustration, yet rejected every path that might have led elsewhere. I spoke with patience. I searched for better examples, clearer metaphors, and gentler language. Sometimes I spent hours arranging my thoughts because I wanted them to hear not merely my conclusion, but the road that had led me there. Almost nothing changed. What I usually received in return was neither argument nor curiosity. It was something far subtler, a courteous smile, a slight nod, the social performance of listening. A conversation that appeared meaningful in the moment, dissolved without leaving a trace. Days later, the same complaints returned, the same habits persisted, and life quietly resumed its familiar orbit as though we had never spoken at all. At first, I blamed myself. Perhaps I had explained it poorly. Perhaps the timing was wrong. Perhaps I lacked the eloquence needed to carry the weight of the idea. So I refined my explanations. I simplified them. Then I made them more sophisticated again. I searched for stories instead of abstractions, questions instead of assertions, compassion instead of certainty. The outcome never really changed. Eventually, a more uncomfortable possibility presented itself. What if the problem wasn't my explanation? What if the act of explaining was itself the mistake? That realization arrived slowly, not as a flash of enlightenment, but as the erosion of a comforting illusion. I had imagined myself acting out of generosity. Looking back, I can see that something else was happening beneath the surface. I wasn't simply giving away insights, I was spending them. Every genuine realization carries a certain living force while it is still ripening within us. Speak too quickly, and that force disperses before it has finished its work. What remains is often only language, the polished shell left behind after the living creature has gone. Long before I understood this, there was a sentence in the Gospels that had always sounded strangely severe. Do not give what is holy to dogs, neither cast your pearls before swine. For years I heard those words as a warning about other people. I assumed Christ was dividing humanity into those who deserved wisdom and those who did not. The older I became, the less convincing that interpretation seemed. The saying was never an insult. It was an observation. The image is remarkably precise. A pearl has no value to an animal that cannot recognize it. It is not rejected because it lacks beauty. It is rejected because its value belongs to an entirely different order of perception. The failure lies neither in the pearl nor in the animal. It lies in assuming that recognition can exist where the necessary capacity has not yet been formed. The verse continues with a detail I had ignored for years. Lest they trample them under their feet and turn again and attack you. That second line disturbed me far more than the first, because I had lived it. There were moments when I shared something that had cost me years of confusion, failure, and relentless self-examination to understand. Instead of opening a conversation, it became an invitation to ridicule. Sometimes the response was open dismissal. Sometimes it was sarcasm disguised as humor. Occasionally, it was something even more unsettling. a quiet suggestion that I had become naive, self-important, or detached from reality. The idea itself was not merely ignored. It was turned inside out until it became evidence against the one who offered it. Looking back, I realize how much damage that can quietly do. When someone repeatedly treats your deepest convictions as objects of amusement, you begin questioning not only your judgment, but the very experience that gave birth to those convictions. Little by little, certainty erodes because it was entrusted to a place where it could never have been received. Around that time, I immersed myself in the writings of Gurdjieff. I wasn't searching for another philosophical system. There were already enough systems in my life. I wanted an explanation for a pattern I seemed unable to escape. Why do profound truths pass effortlessly through some people while leaving no impression on others? His answer was disarmingly simple. Understanding has very little to do with intelligence. That idea challenged almost everything I had unconsciously believed. We like to imagine that knowledge accumulates the way books accumulate on a shelf, that enough reading, enough lectures, enough intellectual effort will eventually produce wisdom. Gurdjieff argued that this assumption mistakes information for transformation. A person may possess an extraordinary mind and remain inwardly asleep. Another may struggle to articulate a single philosophical argument while possessing a depth that no amount of scholarship can manufacture. The difference, he said, lies in what he called one's level of being. It is an unusual expression because it shifts attention away from what a person knows toward what a person has become. According to Gurdjieff, being is not inherited, nor is it awarded through education or social status. It is shaped through the slow discipline of observing oneself without excuses. It grows whenever illusion gives way to honesty, whenever vanity is recognized instead of obeyed, whenever mechanical habits are brought into the light of awareness rather than allowed to govern another day. This kind of work leaves no visible certificate. No one applauds it. Most people never even notice it. Yet it quietly determines the limits of what we are capable of receiving. A profound teaching does not enter us simply because we hear the words. It enters only if there is already something within capable of meeting it. Otherwise, the teaching passes through us the way sunlight passes through empty air, real enough, yet leaving nothing transformed. That realization dissolved much of my frustration. I stopped expecting every conversation to become fertile ground. More importantly, I stopped confusing another person's inability to receive an idea with a failure of either intelligence or character. Sometimes the soil simply is not ready, and no seed, however extraordinary, can bloom before its season. There was one question I could no longer avoid. If wisdom loses its vitality when offered too freely, why had I been so eager to offer it in the first place? For a long time, I insisted that my motives were generous. I wanted to spare people unnecessary suffering. I wanted to shorten journeys that had cost me years. There was truth in that. Compassion was certainly present, but it was not alone. Beneath compassion lived another desire, quieter, harder to admit, and infinitely more personal. I wanted someone else to confirm what I had seen. An insight can feel strangely fragile while it is still becoming part of you. Before it settles into your character, it often seeks reassurance. Another person's agreement feels like proof that you have not mistaken imagination for understanding. Without realizing it, I had been asking others to authenticate experiences that I should have learned to stand on their own. What I called teaching was often a search for witnesses. There was another layer beneath that. The identity of being the one who understands had become almost invisible to me because I wore it every day. I admired people who questioned appearances, who searched beneath convention, who refused easy answers. Slowly, without intending to, I built an image of myself from those same qualities. Knowledge had become part of my personality, not knowledge itself, but the idea of being someone who possessed it. When people dismissed what I shared, the wound felt strangely disproportionate. I told myself I was disappointed for their sake, but if I looked honestly, something else had been injured. My self-image had been denied the recognition it quietly expected. The ego is remarkably inventive. It can even disguise vanity as service. This was one of Gurdjieff's most unsettling observations. He warned that our finest intentions are rarely pure. Almost every noble impulse carries hidden motives folded within it. The desire to help often conceals the desire to be admired. The wish to teach frequently shelters the wish to feel significant. Even sacrifice can become another method of self-importance. His point was never that generosity is impossible. It was that self-deception is astonishingly easy. Inner work begins where comforting stories about ourselves begin to fall apart. Once I recognized this mixture within me, something unexpected happened. Silence stopped feeling like deprivation. It became a form of stewardship. Ideas that had once rushed toward conversation now remained where they belonged. I allowed them to mature in private. I stopped measuring their value by how effectively I could explain them and began asking a different question. How completely have they transformed me? An idea repeated is inexpensive. An idea embodied is extraordinarily costly. It asks for years instead of minutes, habits instead of opinions, character instead of vocabulary. That is why genuine wisdom almost always appears quieter than intelligence. Intelligence enjoys demonstration. Wisdom rarely feels compelled to advertise itself. I often thought about the strange way Gurdjieff taught his own students. Anyone expecting systematic lectures would have been disappointed. Questions were frequently met with stories that seemed unrelated, prolonged silence, or answers so indirect they appeared almost evasive. Many students left frustrated, convinced they had received nothing. Years later, some realized they had been answered with unsettling precision. The teacher had not responded to the question that was spoken. He had responded to the person asking it. There is profound mercy in refusing to explain something before another human being possesses the capacity to live it. An answer offered too early can become an obstacle rather than a gift. Language has an unfortunate tendency to imitate understanding. Once we acquire the correct words, we easily mistake fluency for transformation. We begin speaking from borrowed certainty while remaining inwardly unchanged. In that condition, knowledge no longer awakens us. It protects us from awakening. I know this because I lived inside that illusion. When I was younger, I consumed philosophy with enormous enthusiasm. I could discuss paradoxes, quote thinkers, compare traditions, and navigate conversations that sounded, at least on the surface, remarkably thoughtful. Looking back, I recognize how little of it had actually entered my life. My bookshelf expanded faster than my character. The language of transformation became a substitute for transformation itself. No one had warned me that the two could become enemies. Since then, I have become suspicious of my own eagerness to explain. Whenever someone asks a serious question, I try first to listen beneath the words, what is really being asked? Is this the curiosity of someone collecting interesting ideas? Or is it the hunger of someone whose previous way of living has finally become impossible? Those two conditions can sound identical. They are separated by an entire life. Curiosity enjoys accumulation. Need is willing to surrender. A person whose certainties have collapsed does not seek entertainment. They are searching because they can no longer continue as they are. Something within them has already broken open. Only then does a difficult truth have somewhere to land. Everything else resembles browsing through a library without intending to read a single book. This realization changed not only the way I spoke, it changed the way I listened. Before seeking guidance from anyone, I learned to question my own readiness. Was I genuinely prepared to be altered by what I hoped to hear, or was I searching for elegant ideas that would decorate beliefs I already intended to keep? That question continues to humble me. More often than I care to admit, I discover that what I call seeking is simply a refined form of collecting. Real learning is far more demanding. It dismantles before it builds. Perhaps the clearest sign that an insight has truly entered your life is surprisingly simple. The urge to announce it begins to disappear. When something transforms you at the deepest level, words often become unnecessary for a time. You carry it silently while it reshapes your perceptions, your choices, your relationships, even the smallest habits that no audience will ever witness. Only later, sometimes years later, does speech return, and when it does, it no longer feels like an attempt to convince. It feels like gratitude. I speak far less than I once did, not because I possess greater certainty, quite the opposite. The more deeply I examine myself, the more aware I become of how incomplete every understanding remains. Whatever truth I have managed to hold has usually arrived through confusion, disappointment, failure, and the slow dismantling of convictions I once defended with complete confidence. That realization has made me gentler with others and with myself. The old urgency to awaken everyone has quietly dissolved. People awaken in their own season. No amount of persuasion can replace the work that suffering, honesty, and time accomplish together. The pearl was never meant to be scattered in every direction. Its purpose is first to transform the one entrusted to carry it. Only then, perhaps without even intending to, does its presence begin to illuminate others. And by then, it is no longer being thrown, it is simply being lived.